So this is the fourth episode of our new normal webinar, and so far myself and Kat, the half of our panel are here. We're waiting on the other half, but today's episode is looking at engagement. So really looking at engagement and what that means, particularly in reference to what's happened around COVID-19, of course, and how, I guess, teaching and learning has certainly gone for a significant change because of that. So how does online engagement perhaps differ from person-to-person paradigms? What are some of the implications? And what's the future as well? So I guess there's a fair bit of rhetoric around what happens next in post-COVID, and will there actually be a post-COVID, or has the world actually changed so that our practice in teaching and learning has actually changed forever or not? Certainly will be an interesting time to see. So just while we're waiting, I do have some very brief intro notes here, and this is a QR code that you could scan if you want to bookmark these, if you've got a mobile device with a camera. If not, then the short link just below it will also take you to these notes. So that's go.unimelb.edu/S9QJ. I think that's a Q. It could be a G, couldn't it? Try it and see which one works.
Thomas, would you mind reading that out again, just so it's
Sure.
small on my screen?
So HTTP,
Yep.
I would have thought it was an S actually, but it's not. http://go.unimelb.edu.au/S9, and I think it's a Q. It's just slightly obscured, QJ.
Thank you.
It does look like a Q, yep. And if I click on that link just to show you, it'll open this page in your web browser, or if you do actually have Evernote on your computer, it should ask you to open an Evernote. It's going slow.
Thanks, Catherine. That's helpful.
Yeah, good idea. Put it in the chat. We have the technology. Yes.
So perhaps we should start with that first question, which is, it's going to be directed to Thomas anyway, which is what does engagement look like if we decrease synchronous learning and when we can't see our students? So I suppose this really is an online world, so there's obviously synchronous learning in an online world. Do you want to start off with a response, Tom?
Yeah. So I guess the two modes really that we have when we're looking at online are synchronous or asynchronous. And I guess we're kind of assuming people know what those terms mean, but effectively synchronous means at the same time. So that would be things like video streaming and what we're doing right now with the Zoom meeting. So we're all here, even though we're not in the same physical location, we're virtually here at the same time. We're connected through the same Zoom session. So I guess the benefits of synchronous that it replicates the face-to-face in quite a lot of ways. But the downside of the synchronous type of activities are that they tend to be very teacher-centered, perhaps kind of teacher-directed, and can be just a complete substitution for a lecture. So a face-to-face lecture becomes effectively a lecture online. So that's synchronous. Asynchronous is where things happen at different times, and so there can be things like discussion forums, question and answer, various activities that students can do in their own time and then respond to. So when we decrease the synchronous learning aspects, which a lot of the research suggests that when we're online, we actually should minimize or reduce the amount of synchronous activities that we have, just to give our students a bit more flexibility of access. If they don't have good internet access, if they don't have access to the appropriate types of devices. But it's more about going beyond just replicating a lecture in the online domain to how can we facilitate interaction. And that's, I guess, my key point here is what we really want to focus on is interaction and collaboration. So in any form of teaching and learning, that doesn't have to be online. The research is shown by Eric Mazur, who did a lot of research around brain activity during lectures, that the engagement of students, or the brain activity of students in a traditional lecture, which is just someone at the front talking, delivery, their brain activity is actually the least of any other activity during their day. In fact, less than watching TV, and in fact even less than sleeping. Which is kind of interesting. So a lecture can be an extremely passive experience for students, and that's not particularly engaging. It's not really a great way to learn. But what Eric Mazur found, that as soon as any form of interaction was put into that environment, into the lecture, so maybe polling, asking questions, getting people to turn around and talk to each other and collaborate, brain activity went up hugely. And so as a measure of, I guess, learning via brainwave activity, you hope they correlate. His conclusion was that any form of interaction and collaboration in a learning environment increases engagement and learning. So the same thing with online, using asynchronous tools to really focus on interaction and collaboration, and that interaction and collaboration between the teacher and students, between students and students, so peer interaction and collaboration, and between students and content, whatever that content may be. So we all know that students are driven by assessment. So if you're going to focus upon creating interaction and collaboration, you need to assess it somehow. Build some assessment marks into it. Make that part of your assessment activities. And my suggestion is that we move away from what we do as lecturers to focus on what the students do, and focusing upon things like student-generated content. So that's like project-based learning or problem-based learning. And these work fantastically online with that asynchronous type of approach, because students can go away, reflect, they can create a team, they can go and capture some content that's relevant, they can curate, they can build a project and significantly reflect upon a problem. And then also get into that aspect of getting students to share and publish their work. So going beyond them just creating content, but actually getting them to actually share a peer review. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that online. So I guess my final point there is what we really want to do is facilitate online learning communities. So it's about trying to create a group atmosphere, trying to build a real learning community around what you're doing. So once again, coming back to my first point, getting away from just being delivery and it being about the teacher. So asynchronous activities that really focus on interaction, collaboration, and building learning communities.
Thomas, we've actually got Siew, Fang and Chris now, so they've joined us. And I realised we haven't actually done introductions of the panel. So we really should probably wind it back a bit, but that's a fantastic start to this conversation. Thomas, do you just want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I've just got our Twitter addresses there as well as our names. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, then that would be great. So myself, I'm Associate Professor in Technology Enhanced Learning and Higher Education with CSHE. And the impact of COVID-19 has been especially quite huge for me, because I was due to start at CSHE in April, and I have, but I'm remote from New Zealand still. So and all my colleagues at CSHE have been remote from home, so we're all online anyway. Chris.
Sure. I'm Chris Deneen, and I'm a senior lecturer with the Melbourne Centre for the Study of Higher Education. And my areas of development and research focus on assessment, especially in higher education. I'm very interested in the affordances and challenges presented by using technology in and around assessment, both assessment for learning and assessment of learning. And yeah, it's been a fascinating period dealing with the new normal that COVID presents for us. And so I've been working on things like how we can make the transition from traditional invigilated in-person examinations to open book online exams. And then also, of course, all of the other potentials that we are now having to explore around feedback, formative assessment, and how we can do this in this new environment.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Siew. I'm an engagement lead at the Melbourne Centre for the Study of Higher Education. So what engagement means to me in my role is that how do we engage with the external stakeholders, the businesses, the communities, the governments, and the students as well. And then how do we really collaborate and partners? And then how do we translate that into learning and teaching and research? So it's a really interesting way to start this webinar that is what Thom was saying, that how do we really engage? We can't see each other. And then we actually are engaging while Thom is in New Zealand, and then we are not necessarily seeing each other, but we are seeing each other. And this notion of time is actually through this, the new normal notion of time that, we actually are in a different time zone, but we actually engage at the same time. So I find it's quite fascinating, but thank you all. And Catherine.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Catherine Manning. I'm the manager of the Learning and Teaching Support Team in Learning Environments, which sits alongside MCSHE. And the team I'm in, we do a lot of converting subjects to be fully online, and I have a team of learning designers who are experts in how to make online learning work well and work for learning. And I think for us, this topic is absolutely key. Active learning, students being active in the learning process in the online environment is absolutely critical for the success of well-designed online learning. So if you are going fully online and you're not having an active experience for the students, you're really missing something. And for us, it's been a big challenge to get this message out. I think a lot of academics have done emergency online, and that's really been taking their format of a subject that is lecture, perhaps do some reading in between the lecture, then a tutorial, where a face-to-face tutorial in small groups, and then perhaps some sort of assessment somewhere along that 12-week structure, and on places maybe an essay and that type of thing. And that format, they've basically converted to the online format, but it isn't what we know is the best online learning. It's not designed for active learning. And I suppose that's where I see the online, this synchronous learning, and we're being purely synchronous. We're not having webinars like this. Yes, you can, there's heaps of tools out there to help, as Thomas has talked about, collaborative tools, interactive videos, H5P. There's a list of tools that help you, but what actually matters is the design, and the design of the subject, and how you design it for interactivity. And this could be inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, having students reflect on case studies. There's a lot of ways to do it, but it's going back and making activity and as key to how you design that subject. That's crucial for engagement in the online world. I don't know what anyone else wants to add to that. We're addressing this first question in the list. I'm making Thomas jump all over the place. What does engagement look like when we decrease synchronized learning and can't see our students?
To me, I think that really create opportunity for us to rethink engagement. Engagement happen all the time, but it not necessarily happen when we have to be together or when we see each other. I think that really, I think opportunity for us to really rethink this concept. How do we really taking on other contexts where international students already engage and applying this knowledge of, okay, engagement happen all the time, crossing geographical boundary and time zone. And then we're thinking about applying this concept back in learning and teaching and engaging across borders and across time zone.
So perhaps we want to go on to question 2 at this point. I'll just share my screen again. So question 2.
How does online engagement differ from in-person paradigm? That's a really good question. I would say that they create different types of dynamic. There are opportunity for shyer introverts to actually engage more online, where they may not feel comfortable in a face-to-face context. I have to say that being in my background, my education background, Chinese Malaysian, growing up in an education systems that we don't question the teachers. We don't ask questions when the teachers are speaking. And it's how do we really overcome those barriers of, in the social learning space, asking question and engaging with the classmates and with the teachers. It's almost as a performative kind of space that we have to perform and in order to learn. And then again, I have children growing up in Australia, knowing that presentation is the key. It's part of learning. You present as soon as you were actually, 5, 6 years old. It's a very common thing that you actually engage and participate in a class environment. So again, I really think that online learning create a different way of engagement that allow greater diversity of participations that face-to-face learning may not provide that opportunity.
I think one of the key areas that's different with online learning, particularly if we look at asynchronous approaches, is that it gives much more time for reflection. People will be able to craft answers to questions, craft responses to problems, etc. And particularly for students whose perhaps first language is not English, or whatever the language is that the learning is being facilitated in, it gives them that ability to really understand what the question is. Whereas in the face-to-face environment, perhaps there's just the issue of language, the issue of vulnerability, of feeling safe in that environment, or even just for students who feel shy. And so the asynchronous nature of online allows the empowerment of people in those types of situations. And in fact, I found perhaps the most empowered tend to be the most downtrodden in real life, and so your perhaps older returning students who might be feel a bit intimidated in class because they haven't been in formal education for 20 years or something, suddenly feel empowered because they can reflect and they can bring their experience to answering questions into that learning environment.
I think that's key too, the reflection, and we certainly see that play out, that both these points when we observe discussion boards, in particular in the online space. But one thing that is very important to add here is often students don't know how to perhaps respond as high level or reflect on the question. So it's quite important to have exemplars or scaffolding to explain how you want discussions to occur, particularly for asynchronous discussion boards, so that students have a model to kind of follow. Like, all right, if we are going to reflect on this question, what do I do? Well, they need question prompts that really are effective in promoting that. So that aspect of a higher level response to a question, that type of thing. It doesn't necessarily happen just automatically. It does need to be scaffolded and thought about how to ask the questions, what questions to ask to really generate what we're talking about here. But it can be amazing when you do it well.
That can be hard the first time though, can't it? Sorry, Chris. Because if it's the first time you've run an online discussion forum, then you don't have the examples, and that's perhaps where you need to learn from your colleagues or collaborate on that to get some examples. Sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say that I think there's a greater expectation in online engagements that there will be asynchronous. You know, I'm running a Melbourne teaching certificate, and colleagues expect that because it's online, the vast majority of it is going to be asynchronous, and it fits people's schedule better. But at the same time, I think Catherine's point is absolutely essential, which is people need guidance in what that actually means and how they can dig down and how they can create it in a way that is not just surface level, but deep. And that was my contribution. And one of the questions was, how do we move from surface to deep level? And I think in the framing of this, it's exemplars, clear expectations, leading by example. I mean, I know a lot of people who use online forums to great effect as an asynchronous means of engagement, but they typically will keep up with those forums as a continuous sustained engagement themselves as the instructor. And I think if you don't do that and you don't show students that you're doing it, you really can't expect them to do it.
Yeah, I think modeling is really key. Particularly, it's even more important when you can't see people face to face, and therefore
Yes.
in the online environment, modeling the expectations of the interaction with your students is incredibly important.
Mm. I would be quite interested to hear from some of the audience that whether you have any experience or an example that you found engagement online is actually a benefit or more challenging than the in-person paradigms. And yeah, feel free to contribute.
So I see in the chat, Jasmine has posted that Canvas Commons has been great to build online communities in Canvas.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because we deliver a range of extracurricular opportunities designed for University of Melbourne students to, I guess, enhance their student life on campus. So one of them is live projects and the other one is GVIP. And this is the first time that we've really built Canvas community. So when we transitioned to the virtual online space, we were quite blind and I guess a bit lost as to all the features and all the opportunities that the technology offers, but it's been a really great tool to see what else is going on around the university, and the workshops and the opportunities of training that Learning Environments provides has been really great for us. So we've been to feedback fruits sessions, H5P. I really like the HTML one as well. And it's great that there's already, I guess, templates on the system that allow us to code quite easily, because I think coding is something that's pretty new to quite a few of us who are professional staff, and we don't really design Canvas communities to begin with. So it's great to be able to put together those interactive elements for students to, even click an accordion just to expand, even click and reveal. And we've been really intentional about using those features and building our communities to ensure that students have that fun aspect of not just reading a whole text or a whole chunk of text, and there are pictures or there are virtual and visual elements to do that as well.
This is such a great example, the Canvas Commons, and it's a building a community and building a sense of belonging, and during this very confusing and uncertain time. Is this open for everybody that to join, or it has to, how do people interested in this?
What it is, Fang, is if you log on to Canvas, there's a button there called Commons and the global navigation down the far hand side. And anyone can share content there from their subjects, which can then be imported to any other subject. So I'm pretty sure we've actually put up there an example of a discussion board. So if you were going to do a discussion that you wanted to be interactive, we've kind of scaffolded that process. So you then just would import it into your subject and then edit it to be suitable for your particular environment. But we've kind of done half the work for you. And it can include very good looking graphics and HTML coding in the background as well. So that's what Jasmine's talking about. It's people sharing their good practice so that others can use it. It's just within the University of Melbourne.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of links into our third question, which is what are the implications of COVID-19 for online student engagement practices? What kind of institutional culture could we foster to cultivate greater student engagement? I think that's a great example of that.
Yeah, there's been a movement out there. It's a very much a bottom-up approach to community buildings. You know, the notion of community is that sort of a community of practice. How do we build our community through sharing? And sharing is really quite a powerful approach. You know, people feel regain a sense of agency, a sense of autonomy, and it really cultivate very positive cultures that people felt a greater sense of belonging. So yes, fantastic initiative. I would like to hear more in any other great practice that have this, you know, fostering of positive institutional culture during COVID-19 lockdown.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share a little bit about what we did with that. And I suppose I'd also like to pose a question too to the panel around this. So one of the things that we embraced in terms of the culture, I guess, was almost a leveling of power, if you like, of really allowing our teaching team to embrace themselves as learners, not as experts. And so kind of leveling out that we're all in this together to be able to learn that in actual fact, our students are far more tech savvy than many of our educators. And so it was really about leveraging different skills in that environment that allowed us to kind of create a culture of ongoing learning, a learning community that included the tutor or the lecturer or whoever was actually in that space. And I'm just curious about, you know, from your own levels of expertise, whether, you know, what your thoughts are around the mindset of the educator coming into this. I know Chris was speaking about the importance of, you know, us engaging in the same way that we expect and modeling what we expect for students. And I suppose I'm just curious about your perspectives of the importance of the mindset of the educator in creating that engagement.
This is a very good question, Rachel. There are a lot of literatures on engagement, really looking at the cultivating of mindset. It starts from really having exactly what I have said earlier, having the mindset that we are all experts in a different way. We all have knowledge, resources, network, and contacts, and skills that collectively we are better together. So traditionally, university, it's set up in a structure, system, and cultures that is expertise, you know, like expertise driven. We actually know the answers and we transfer and transmit knowledge to the learner. So this is a hierarchical, almost binary relationship that it, you know, has been challenged and questions. You know, there are literature out there as well that how can we really shift that relationship and shift that structure that everybody can co-create. Everybody can, in fact, it's more powerful if knowledge is exchanged, shared, and co-create. So in the engagement literatures, there has been the 3 types of engagement. One is knowledge transfer, knowledge transmission, one-way directional. I'm the expert, I know the answers. You learn exactly what need to be learned. The others is knowledge exchange, is true sharing, listening to each other's, and then how do we really get benefit out of both or multiple sides. The third one is knowledge co-creation. It's a totally shift of relationship and dynamics of from the very beginning, you set up this expectation and understanding of your role as learner, and together, everybody as learner and everybody is expert together. And how do we create this knowledge that you have never probably expected in the other paradigms? So yeah, Rachel, I think COVID-19 almost forced many academic and even institution in higher education sector to rethink how the sector could transform. You know, this is really the missions, the ethos of the higher education sector is about, you know, being creating new knowledge, and it's transformed the world. And the mindset is very important.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's what excites me about, you know, what this has afforded us, right, is the opportunity to really be able to return to that as the heart of the work that we do. So I think culturally, when we work in, you know, that hierarchical modality, it can be challenging at times. And thank you so much for redirecting me back to that engagement literature, because I think that will really help in supporting the evidence behind why we're doing what we're doing.
I think there's also a lot of literature around, if you're looking at how do we build learning community, well, there's a lot of literature around, particularly a couple of concepts, and one being the community of inquiry. So a lot of literature around that, around how do we create a community of inquiry and how do we create that online, and moving away from it being so teacher-centric. And then perhaps taking that even further is the whole concept of communities of practice, where it's much more a level playing field of peers. Admittedly, a core group of experts that their job is to facilitate the people on the edges to, hopefully bring them into the core group. But a lot of literature around that and how to actually go about creating communities of inquiry and communities of practice. So there's a couple of really good models there you can learn from.
Thank you.
I would say too that one thing that it speaks to what Rachel is asking about, but a lot of other things is perceived benefit. And when we talk about building communities of inquiry and practice, I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to sustaining them. And I think the only way that you can sustain them as vibrant communities is if people perceive benefit to their continuing to be a member of that community. And so I think really part of it is cultivating in people a refined sense of benefit. In other words, you help them understand what should you be looking for, what benefits really matter, but then delivering on that. And, to me, that's the connection between the mindset and then outside the mind, what's actually being offered.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. And I think it even goes further than that, to the point of if you're wanting to really build a community of inquiry or community of practice, you need to assess that somehow. It's got to become part of the actual course assessment, not just an add-on, not just a formative sort of a process, but, what is it that you're going to assess as engagement or activity within that community of inquiry or community of practice, and bring it down to that level.
To add on Chris' comments, and the perceived benefits is also shaped by the institutional structures, and then you mentioned Thom's systems. What is being incentivized, as benefit. So the incentive systems need to be really built in. So beyond shifting the mindset of individuals to engage in a more collaborative, co-creative way, but the systems also need to incentivize that practice, so the benefit will be more realized. That okay, we're doing it, and people more likely to get recognized and acknowledged by doing things like this. That to many others, it's the perceived benefit is very little, because you're not going to get recognized for the work that you've done. It is add-on. I'm already busy enough. It's too time consuming, and the outcome is a bit soft, because it's often not tangible outcome. So, but people feel good. People feel the trust is built. The trust and feeling good, it's hard to measure. But, if the great student grades, that is more of a measured outcome. So kind of really have to build in a systemic approach to really cultivate the institutional cultures that cultivate greater student engagement, to me.
Yeah.
Even looking at, academic progression and how we approve that and that type of thing. If we can insist on evidence of something like inquiry-based learning or subject design, it immediately puts a different focus on that for everybody.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I guess
planning, systemically planning. I'm sorry, Thom. This time it's my turn to talk over you.
That's all right.
It's also, Siew Fang is talking about, systemic understandings and actions. And I think, it's so important to plan from the point of view of the people who you want to continue to engage in that practice. And I got to tell you, a few years ago, I was working with another university, and the PVC learning and teaching there said, well, I want a community of practice here, 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 and here. And when she was pressed for an explanation of this, her response, which was absolutely correct, was an articulation of an executive level perspective on what would benefit the entire university. And she was 100% correct. And she was absolutely not thinking from the point of view that you wanted of the people who are going to be in there. In other words, the folks who are actually teaching subject level, because they're not thinking at that level. They're thinking completely differently. And so when you articulate the reason for a community of practice, if you're fostering one or you're trying to sustain one, you have to put yourself into the mindset of the people you want in there. And that's really tough to do, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, and you've got to be explicit about that as well. If you're going to be doing that with your students, then yeah, you've got to make it really explicit what and why.
Yeah, same goes for the students. If you're an instructor, you have to make that leap, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's one point that really helps with student engagement is if you have students in the design process of your subject and actually giving input to what you're planning, what you're doing. And then it is much easier for you to make that leap to how does this land then, because you're actually asking the actual students that are going to be part of it. Well, not the actual students, but, you know, getting student input. And the more we do that, which we really don't do enough, and that's something perhaps we could systemically as a university almost insist on or find ways to make this an easier process, have student input into the design of subjects themselves.
And there's huge benefits around that, Kat. So it's not only, you know, if you bring the students on board as part of the designers of the learning environment within that course, then you can have really good examples that you can show for the next, you know, class. But it really gets them, you know, like the whole theme of this webinar, gets them engaged. It gets them buy-in to that whole process if their work and their, you know, examples are really valued. So I guess we've kind of been skirting around question 4. I just wanted to quickly screen share to remind people of question 4. So what are some examples of how do we measure online engagement and perhaps some limitations? So I guess we're all pretty much aware that, you know, the student surveys really measure student satisfaction. You know, did they actually enjoy the learning in that course or not? Did they get on with the you know, the lecturer? Did they think that their marks were what they deserved, etc.? So those are the types of things that the student surveys tend to measure rather than learning. And there's a spelling mistake there. It should actually say learning rather than learner. And I guess that's partly because measuring learning is hard. You know, how do you measure learning? And I guess there's ways to do that. And a lot of that comes back to that idea of interaction and collaboration. If you can show evidence of interaction and collaboration, then hopefully learning is going alongside of that. So you can sort of kind of triangulate what you're doing. And one way that I try to do that is through perhaps things like social network analysis. So particularly if I'm asking students to get engaged using social media or other forms of technology, technology has a long tail. It has analytics built into it mostly. There's statistics that we can use. So things like, you know, Canvas stats for the LMS. If I just jump into a course that I facilitated earlier this year, and you know, this just, you click on the button that says explore the stats for Canvas, and you can see, you know, the types of how many times students have looked at a page, what pages have they looked at. You can choose it via things like page views. So in this case, the course home, which seems a bit of a no-brainer, really had the most hits. You know, it's the entry page of the course, but it didn't have a whole lot of participation because that's just a content delivery page. So if we look at what were the most active participatory elements, well, it's the stuff that I got my students to actually be involved in. And so it's things like negotiating the assessment with them and then choosing an assessment topic while they got quite highly engaged in that. So you can use the basic stats built into things like Canvas and interpret those. And of course, like any stats, you can, you know, make it say an infinite number of things, but hopefully you're lining it up with what the actual reality is. So that's one way to do it. I use WordPress a lot, and WordPress has analytics built into it. And this is just a WordPress site for a community we're developing, and you can see these basic peaks of activity pretty much line up with whenever there's a post on this blog. So there's a direct correlation between activity that's happening and you know, forms of interaction. The stats also show where that interaction has happened around the globe. So it gives you a really nice sort of feedback on, hey, my students are all in Australia, but we're getting actually, you know, interaction from people all around the world. And I would hope that that's true, because I invited quite a few, you know, international experts into the course as well to give feedback and create community. And it also gives us some stats around where are some of this participation coming from. So things like LinkedIn, Twitter, Yammer, etc. Another tool, just an example I use, is Tags Explorer, which uses Twitter analysis, and we use a hashtag for the course. And in this case, we can do a whole lot more analysis. Click on the various nodes, which are participants, and then the lines are the interactions, the conversations that are happening, and things like who's the top conversationalist. Well, in this case, myself, because I'm modeling process. And then, you know, Paula was the next highest engaging, and Fred, who is one of our international experts, etc. And we can do all sorts of analysis around this, and even do things like create a little video of how did that conversation build over the length of the course. And this is a really nice little, you know, you can create a little video of that community building using these sorts of tools. Another tool I use is things like get students to put themselves on a map and associate themselves with a particular context. And that just, once again, gives us some form of feedback around interaction. And we made this map public. And so we've actually got almost 1,700 views, even though there's only 20 students in the course. So although the map was public, participation in the map was by invitation only, so it's private. But by making it public, you know, it's great feedback on, hey, people are interested in what we're doing. Just a couple more examples. So we used ePortfolios, and we used WordPress. And even though there's only 20 students in this particular course, it's scalable beyond that. So using RSS reading tools, you can see the level of interaction that happened over this course. Each one of these is a comment or a post on these 20 students' blogs. You can see that I'm quite happy with that level of interaction. You know, there's quite a bit that's been going on over the weeks of that course. And once again, and also using technology to enable me to be able to check that interaction and that level of interaction and see if I need to be engaged in a conversation or not. And then around co-creation. So this is an example of co-creating content where we created a collaborative Flipboard magazine, which is once again an RSS reader, but students can contribute to this. And because all their other work, their e-portfolios are online, they can just paste links to their activity, find useful, you know, articles, etc. And the brilliant thing about this is the stats as well, which tells us things like how many views there are, how many page flips, etc., and how many stories. So using the tools to give you that sort of level of feedback and stats is not really that hard. It's just thinking about how to do it. And you can do other things as well, like maybe getting your students to actually create little short video feedback, etc. So that's just some examples to get you thinking.
It's probably worth adding, sort of, we're getting into the whole analytics conversation, which is a big conversation around online learning, but probably not the examples Thomas going to are great as to show engagement, but sometimes when you look at Canvas data or whatever LMS you have, it's really just counting clicks. It doesn't count engagement or understanding. So someone could be clicking something because they don't get it, or someone can be clicking something because they do get it and they're really interested in it. But a click doesn't tell you that. It just tells you they clicked. So we always have to, I suppose, interpret click data with a bit of caution, depending on, you know, like if someone's looking at blog posts that are public and they're out in the world, that's obviously showing that they're interested in it because they've got no reason to go there. There's nothing to force them to go there. So obviously context is everything, but you do need to think about what the data is telling you. It doesn't necessarily tell you that they understand it or that they are even kind of it's showing you they're looking at it, but that's all. It's all you can really read with any confidence. It may take more questions or a different approach or a survey to really look at whether engagement has been successful.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And as Thom was explaining this, I kept thinking about the difference between learning and achievement, which is a little bit, more in my area. And people often think, well, academic assessment, the assessment that you're going to give to a student in a subject, I'm measuring their learning. But that's not correct. What you're actually measuring is their academic achievement, and you're inferring their learning, because learning is a set of discrete psychological operations, and we don't measure those through our examinations, our e-portfolios. And it's probably worth even thinking about engagement along similar lines, isn't it? Where, we can look at the number of clicks, as Kat pointed out, or we can look at more complex operations, but aren't we still just inferring engagement instead of directly measuring it?
That's a really interesting point. I think when we unpack the difference between learning and achievement, we actually learn the best when we make mistake, and we learn from the mistake. So achievement is a counter, ideas of making mistakes. And so how do we really measure, what is the best measurement of engagement? To me, is that safe space that we create, that the student will keep coming back, and then they feel the sense of communities, again, that you mentioned by Rachel and Jasmine earlier, that people actually felt that's a safe space for us to come back, to engage. It's okay to make mistake. It's a sense of communities that everybody is expert, everybody is learners at the same time. And this one is a bit harder to measure, and it's beyond the number of clicks, as what Kat was mentioned. So yeah, I'm really, again, quite curious and find out from the audience too, is there any other way that you have tried and tested that it gave a different insight into how you measure student engagement? And again, it could be trial and errors, and it doesn't have to be the best measurement tool. Any experience from the group? Thomas posted biometrics.
Biometrics.
What is that?
The number of smiles.
Oh, there's things like heart rate, skin conductivity for sweating, you're under stress.
Oh, yeah.
And we have actually done that, particularly with paramedic training. So that's a very stressful activity. You're in a very high stress environment when you're treating someone with critical injuries. And what we wanted to try to measure was whether a virtual environment was actually putting students under a similar sort of stress as they were in a real environment, and then inferring that learning was happening because the stress induced in that scenario. And so that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So follow on the point of that student engagement is a create that sense of community, that we can make mistakes, and then almost that students need to feel they're safe and are not stressed. So in that way, achievement framework need to be rethink, and assessment framework would need to be redesigned. Again, Kath mentioned about sometimes having a whole lot of tools is insufficient. What's important is the design. And I keep coming back to that, how do we really design the type of learning and teaching that's engaging? And then we can't really take on the so-called, now we're in new normal, the old way of thinking and framework as we're thinking about design.
I have an example of one of the ways that we've done that. We actually did it pre-online, but it actually works much better this year online, which I always find curious. And it was actually about designing in a peer assessment. And in this instance, it was not about assessing the quality of the draft. So we actually had students submit a draft of their assessment. And then the peers actually provided feedback. And what we were grading for was the quality of the peer feedback. So actually looking at their engagement in the critical analysis and the capacity to be able to give feedback, which was a demonstration of their application of learning, to Chris's point, because they actually had to, you know, demonstrate they could actually apply the concepts that we were teaching in the content to the way in which they were actually giving feedback. And I have to say, I was absolutely blown away by the quality of the feedback that the students gave, the level of care and connection that they afforded their peers. So it actually served, I guess, a variety of different purposes. It created a sense of community and engagement, as well as providing really meaningful feedback for, so for us, in that instance, it's an intensive subject, so it's delivered in 2 weeks. So the capacity to be able to get meaningful formative feedback to students from a tutor is challenging. So it served, yeah, kind of a variety of different purposes, if you like.
Fantastic example. Great. I loved it. And then you had to really think about how do you give feedback that is actually constructive. And that's another skill.
That kind of comes back to the concept of the hierarchy of learning, and you know, as you're moving up the supposed scale, you learn more when you teach, you know, than you do supposedly. But you know, so if you're getting your students to be engaged in teaching each other or peer review, that's hopefully a higher level of engagement that you're bringing about.
Well, notice of the time, then we are at just 1 o'clock. Maybe we should just wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing and engaging with all of us. And again, please give us feedback. And how do you think the next sessions could actually run in a way that you find more beneficial and relevant to the work that you do? So I think the conversation has been fantastic and rich. And then, yeah, let's keep engaging. Thank you very much, and wishing everybody a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much for a great session, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.